and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I am your other host, Andrei Kurenkov. Before we get into it, I just want to give a quick shout out to a couple of reviews we got on Apple Podcasts. It's really fun to see. Yeah. One of them says a great AI resource. It's by a law professor who does a lot of work in AI and thinks that the podcast is chatty but not superficial and a great way to stay up on the latest developments in AI and machine learning. Which is, so fun. And then another review that was just a couple of days after that is by a PhD student in AI who says that he mostly sees news from reading research papers. So hearing us give a high-level overview of the big AI news from a week is very refreshing and is a way to hear a broader perspective. And he tells us to keep up the good work. So I guess we'll try to do that.
I'm actually really happy that we are catering to exactly the two groups that we were thinking about catering, actually, to the people who are, want to keep up to date with AI news generally and who are not in AI, and also people who are in AI but deep in the thick of it and the weeds of it and want to know a bit more about what's going on, which is us typically, except for when we're doing this.
Yeah. This is partially just because we enjoy keeping up with these things, right? So really cool to see these reviews. If you're a listener, we would appreciate it if you review it and just give your thoughts, why you like it, why you listen. It's just always exciting to see this sort of feedback.
And we give you a shout out. That's right.
We do. We'll read your thing and be like, wow, thank you.
Very grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, let's get on with it. This week, we'll be discussing how Amazon uses machine learning to improve video quality on their streaming, how some campaigns hope deepfake candidates will get out to vote. We'll talk about yet another DeepMind paper, this time on deciphering ancient inscriptions, and also another work of research on generating and identifying propaganda. In Society and Ethics, we'll go into a shadowy surveillance machine in Minnesota and some images with synthetic data for dermatology. And we'll end with some fun and neat stories about deciphering pig calls and falling in love with an AI girlfriend, supposedly. So let's get on with the first one in applications business. We got Amazon uses machine learning to improve video quality on Prime Video. And the title pretty much lets you know what this is about. It's about using machine learning to improve quality of their Prime streaming service, where they have a lot of movies and TV shows. This is actually based on a blog post on Amazon.science titled How Prime Video Uses Machine Learning to Ensure Video Quality. And it goes into a pretty decent amount of detail. So at a high level, there is this group in Prime called Video Quality Analysis that has been using machine learning for 3 years to find flaws. And basically these models watch a video that is streamed and detect flaws like blocky frames, dark frames, audio noise, and a bunch of other stuff like video freezes, stutters, video tearing, audio-video synchronization. And this blog post goes into some detail on a few of them, specifically block corruption, audio artifacts, and audio-visual synchronization issues. So really interesting application. Presumably, I guess we would have expected some of this kind of stuff, but it seems like it's really quite involved how much we're using kind of custom models for various issues at this point.
I think this makes a lot of sense that they're doing this. I think it's cool that they published a blog post about it, since I think a lot of us assume, Netflix and the like, HBO, like maybe they're looking into this a lot. But to see Amazon really pushing on this is also really interesting because they have such a strong ML team. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I've definitely, I'm sure all of us have seen, imperfections when we watch video, but I've actually overall been a very happy customer with this kind of stuff around freezes and stutters and synchronization around audio video. I haven't had that many problems with.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite good these days, and no doubt partially because of these sorts of technologies. Of course, there's been sort of more classical signal processing techniques, but they do miss some of the nuance that these machine learning models can get. And I also saw, curiously, at least one of these things has been published. They have a paper, a no reference model for detecting audio artifacts that was published at WACV. So it's cool to see also that they are publishing at least some of this research, so that other streaming services, video providers, etc., can benefit from these ideas.
I will say, I think the biggest problem I have with these platforms is just sign in and two-factor authentication taking forever, and not exactly these problems. But I'm glad these problems are being addressed.
Well, that's another team within Amazon. The VQA team, they cannot help you out of that.
That's right.
But yeah, if you're a researcher, there's some more details in this blog post. They have like lip sync based on SyncNet and some other kind of things. So you might find this interesting.
And our next article is titled, "These Campaigns Hope Deepfake Candidates Help Get Out the Vote." So Yoon Suk-yeol, who is the main opposition party's candidate for the South Korean presidency, actually has an AI version of him that sounds and looks like him and gestures like him and is puppeted by his team. And this AI Yoon basically is him, but slightly more mischievous to appeal to the younger voters out there. Mr. Yoon is 61-year-old, and he's very stern, typically looking, and so this is kind of a lighter version of him to appeal to the younger voter population, who are now kind of becoming the swing voters, or determining also the outcome potentially of the South Korean presidential election. So that's really interesting. They've shared more than 80 clips, and sometimes these clips, are often 30 seconds or less, so kind of like a TikTok. And there has been more than 70,000 comments since the debut in January. The AI Yoon ranges in talking about North Korean missile launches to talking about a K-pop girl group that the nation is fanning over. And so this AI Yoon, of course, is trained on Mr. Yoon, both voice and face, and is controlled largely by his campaign team. However, this deepfake is actually it's not super perfect. It hasn't, it can't completely bob his head in the same way. It can't also express itself as much. It can't really laugh. So thinking about, previous articles that we've touched on, this technology is actually there. So I think his campaign team hasn't leveraged it quite yet to express excitement or be sad around things. But this is such an interesting use case of deepfakes, which is used, in this way that is actually towards the presidential candidacy very candidly, very openly. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I agree. It's super interesting to see this because it's, it seems to be like a very large investment. Like they're using this a lot, and they, really developed this technology and are posting a lot on social media. And, his opponent at first, their team, criticized this move as, being, disingenuous or something. But soon after, an AI version of his opponent, Lee Jae-myung, also emerged. So there's now, for both of them, some sort of AI part where, they still say that the opponent's version only reads things that the real candidate says. In this, for the AI Yoon, as it's called here, it seems like actually his team is writing a whole lot of stuff that they're just posting on his behalf, basically, right? Which is a whole other interesting thing of now. It's one thing to have an offer for your speeches. Now, you can write a speech and have this AI tell it and really distribute the effort of messaging on different things. So, yeah, really interesting. And you have to wonder if this will become common or be attempted elsewhere. Because in this case, it seems like definitely a big tool that this campaign decided to use.
I think what's also very striking to me is the article mentions that, not only is this happening, but the real Yoon, the real candidate human, is actually learning from his AI counterpart. And by, seeing which messages actually catch steam, which messages are popular. And based on that, optimizing his messages on the campaign trail and looking at, the popularity of his online videos that are very short. So he's getting like quick feedback on them from his team scripting that. And so that's been highly effective. And I find that type of, it's like the algorithm is happening on the other side too, where they're very much using this giant A/B test, and also the fact that it is this AI form and it's explicitly this AI form, that it can maybe get away with stuff that's slightly different from the person himself.
Yeah. The article notes that this is meant to appeal to young voters and, basically be on social media, which is where you can get a lot of data pretty easily, right? And it also reminds me, a while ago, we talked about another use case of deepfakes where a politician in India used deepfakes to speak in different dialects for different regions. So in that case, it was sort of similar of tailoring a message to different demographics, right? So it does seem like there is, some kind of strategic, logical reason why this would be useful. And I just took a look in the article, and it's a pretty good deepfake. It looks like the guy. It has good speech. So with some work, as you said, these days it's totally doable.
I looked at it too, and I actually couldn't tell which one was real or fake initially, since both were a little bit low res, or at least I think the real one is low res. And so I couldn't tell initially, but they did stress in the article that the fake one looks a little happier and less stern. I still think both of them look about the same. But
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that I can't really distinguish them probably is telling. Of course, I don't know Korean, so I can't really vet the speech side.
Yeah, exactly. And also, so this looks pretty good, and it's meant for social media where people probably aren't looking over it super carefully. And these are like short tidbits, as you said. And some of these videos just take 30 minutes to make. So, if there is something trending, some trending topic, the team could just put out one of these videos without having to write and record and, whatever, with a politician. So very interesting and kind of unprecedented as far as I know. And another example of deepfakes like starting to emerge in real ways as opposed to just discussing of how they might emerge. We've seen them being used in ads and with models for advertisements, and now apparently in politics in a real way.
So just to jostle things up a little bit, we are adding a fire round after each of our sections of headlines and a quick little quote or description of what's going on in them, just so you get a little bit more coverage on AI news this past week. So this fire round, we'll start with the first one. There's a talent shortage of machine learning engineers right now as demand for AI specialists boom. So yes, there's an ongoing shortage of ML talent as AI grows, and the pandemic also is putting a squeeze on hiring. Next one, meteorite detected using drones and machine learning. So researchers have actually pinpointed the exact location of a new meteorite using drones and some AI, which saves a lot of walking.
And a couple more. We also have why the Andy Warhol diaries recreated the artist's voice with AI. So, another group of filmmakers used so-called deepfakes for a movie project, which we've seen before one time with Anthony Bourdain. So interesting reoccurrence. And last one, we have how AI can make weather forecasting better and cheaper, something we've discussed before. This one is about buying a supercomputer in this case. That's the fire round. We'll see if we keep doing this, but just want to let you know some other stuff going on without getting into a whole discussion. Now, let's move on to our next set of articles, the research and advancements ones. First up, we have DeepMind's new AI model helps decipher, date, and locate ancient inscriptions. We've been talking a lot about DeepMind lately, but that's because they've been doing a lot of interesting work, this one included. So they've really had a trend of collaborating with external groups on various applications of AI as opposed to sort of core AI problems. And in this case, they are looking into, kind of as the article says, restoring missing parts of Greek inscriptions. So basically figuring out which letters are missing. And then also predicting the geographical location of where it came from. So things like Amorgos and vicinity, Ionia, Northern Aegean, all these kinds of things I don't know about, but presumably are archaeological places. And also its chronological attribution of kind of a distribution of, is it 300 BC, 250 BC, etc. And they collaborated with historian Thea Sommerschild, is a historian and machine learning expert who co-led this project along with someone from DeepMind. And they used a pretty standard transformer kind of architecture, trained it on about 80,000 Greek inscriptions labeled by historians, and created a model that is somewhat accurate, 62% accurate in restoring letters, 71% accurate predicting location. And so sort of not exactly great, but still, I guess, an advance. And certainly I don't think I've seen something like this. And DeepMind has put a decent amount of effort into this, it looks like.
Yeah, I think we covered a previous article somewhat, related around deciphering ancient texts. And I think here it is doing that, but also doing some restoration work as well, which is really cool. And I think what's even cooler is that this technology, or the method that they are putting out there, is very general. So it'll be able to generalize and extend to other languages as well, and other ancient texts, to help with decoding them and other, writing mediums. So it's very cool to see this out there. And also, again, as expected, it is published in Nature.
It is published in Nature, which DeepMind loves to do. But it is, you could argue that this is meant for, people in other disciplines as well, not just machine learning people. So at least in this case, it's not just for PR. There's some justification for it. And it's also very cool. They open sourced the code and the software for anyone to use. So I think we've seen with AlphaFold, it's made a huge splash in that field of sequencing and generally a lot of problems involving protein folding. And this tool was designed as a complementary tool to aid historians, and maybe it will have an impact there as well. So really cool to see this, and to the trend of DeepMind really collaborating with other areas, other scientific challenges, and applying AI, and not necessarily doing any sort of especially novel thing, but just making it useful there, as we've seen just recently with the plasma reactor control that was maybe a week or two ago, and just a ton of stories lately about this.
Yep, overall, super cool stuff. And on to our second article, generating and identifying propaganda with machine learning. So this is a new research and collaboration between some groups in Qatar and the US. And they're actually offering a new method for identifying fake news that isn't just, up until now, it's just detecting, is this fake or is this real? But actually fake snippets usually are combined with real sounding snippets or truthful statements. So this group created a new data set called Propa News, which leverages some of these techniques and has a data set where the fake news pieces are mixed together with truthful statements, and the model still has to be able to detect this. And what's really, really cool about this is, as they put together this data set, they actually made it so that they distilled it such that even humans across 400 mechanical Turk workers couldn't even really tell, that they were fake.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Just in the sense of it being different from just a binary classification here, having this data set that is, let's say, more nuanced, has sort of hyperbole, charged statements, inaccurate or completely false statements, just capturing sort of the real nuance of misinformation instead of maybe making a really binary sort of data set, right? Where some of it is really super clean and some of it is obviously false, right? Misinformation takes a lot of forms. And so it's nice that they, created this data set to really address the problem properly.
That said, the authors do acknowledge that because this is fake news, and news in particular, that it could go out of date very quickly. And so it's also about maybe keeping this up to date. Having this data set is quite challenging and as things move forward in terms of testing things.
Yeah. And I guess it's not surprising, but another positive thing is this is research. So it's published. It was just put online a few days ago in archive. So people can follow up on it and use this technique for generating data sets to then, update it. And it's really, the title of the paper is also pretty fun. The paper is titled "Faking Fake News for Real Fake News Detection, Propaganda-Loaded Training Data Generation." And it's cool to see also classic, in AI machine learning, having fun, memorable titles is a real trick of the trade. Yeah, it really is.
It's all the clickbait. It's the internal AI community is clickbait.
I wouldn't say clickbait. It's it's catchy. It's not clickbait, but it is kind of fun.
You know how many times I clicked "attention is all you need"? Clickbait.
Oh, that's clickbait. That's clickbait. But apparently they were right. To be fair. Anyway, yeah. So. Cool to see a paper like this, given, of course, the importance of the issue. And also cool that it focuses on training data generation specifically. which we don't often see. Usually there's a paper that introduces a data set, but that's just like curation and labeling, and then it's for other techniques. Here they really do research on how to create a sort of data set, which is not trivial. And it's cool to see this aspect of AI, which is often not really discussed in publications, in research, being kind of a focus on this paper.
And on to our lightning round of articles. The first one is machine learning to predict if you'll leave your partner. And so this is using machine learning to predict, couple dissolution. So that sounds more like a study there than the article title, but that is the case. The second one is, will transformers take over artificial intelligence? And this is about how the transformer architecture may or may not be taking over not just natural language, but vision, which we've chatted about, and that might just be the beginning.
Yeah, this one is pretty fun. It's from Quanta magazine, which, if you've seen it, has a lot of really well done articles on various scientific topics. So this is a good overview on this really big deal, transformers, for people outside of research. Then a couple more. We have Dartmouth researchers propose a deep learning model for emotion-based modeling of mental disorders using Reddit conversations. So it can detect emotional problems by the sort of emotional fingerprint. We've seen this kind of thing before, detecting mental health problems for social media. And kind of interesting to see now more research on it for Reddit. And lastly, we have detecting the patient's need for help with machine learning based on expressions. So it's a tool that helps support health analytics that looks at self-rated expression statements used in health-related communication and decision-making. And that's it for the lightning round. Moving on to our society and ethics stories, we have, first up, the secret police. Cops built a shadowy surveillance machine in Minnesota after George Floyd's murder. So this is from the MIT Tech Review and is a very, very in-depth article about basically an investigation of this set of journalists did that uncovered how law enforcement agencies in Minnesota have created this secretive, long-running surveillance program that built a really sophisticated and kind of pretty hidden set of tools for surveillance. So this started right after the murder of George Floyd, which led to, of course, a lot of rioting and general anger and grief in these communities. And that was sort of the reason that this Operation Safety Net was started to build these tools. The reason stated was to maintain public order as Officer Derek Chauvin went on trial for this murder. And it was supposed to only last for this set of period to just deal with this specific trial. But the MIT Technology Review has seen that it expanded far beyond its publicly announced scope and now has expensive use of tools to scour social media, track cell phones, and amass detailed images of people's faces. So there's a lot of detail in this article, very interesting. I'll just give a bit more of a summary, but we can't go into all of it. Basically, this Operation Safety Net was announced in February 2021, and in April 2021, when the guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin was announced, officials told the public that the program was ramping down. But according to emails obtained in the investigation, the operation is actively ongoing, and they are trying to create this Operation Safety Net 2.0. And it's a really expansive set of tools that they've spent tens of millions of public dollars to support, and it seems like a big deal. I don't know. What do you make of it, Sharon?
Well, yeah, and specifically, actually, the MIT Technology Review got a watch list that was used by these agencies in the operation, and that includes, photos and personal information of journalists and other people, and actually credentialed members of the press who were covering some Brooklyn Center unrest in that area were actually temporarily detained and photographed. And then those were uploaded to the Intrepid response system, which, is used kind of like Slack within this tool. And I feel like they are trying to get all of this personal information together to track people who may be acting somewhat against them. It feels very Clearview AI-y. And it's the part around, also targeting journalists feels a little bit not well aligned with
not in the spirit of the First Amendment or democracy in general. Yeah. And on that note, also, this article details how photojournalist J.D. Duggan was able to obtain his file from this system through secret means. Like, they tried to request these things, but were not given them. But I guess investigative reporting, we were able to get it. And the report had 3 pages that included photos of his face, body, and press badge. There were timestamps and maps showing the location of his detention. And this is on a journalist, right? And this seems like, this tool is used or is meant to be used on protesters and journalists. So really, really quite shocking.
Yes, that is definitely showing how split we are, I would say, because I think before I never thought of these two groups as so against each other, but I think now it very much has manifested, and this is one manifestation of that, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it seems like they really went all in. So there was reporting before that showed that policing agencies participating in this Operation Safety Net also have access to other technological surveillance tool beside this Intrepid response system. They also have access to face recognition system by Clearview AI, which we often talk about. They have cell site simulators for cell phone surveillance, license plate readers, and drones, and also social media intelligence gathering, which was a big part of this Operation Safety Net. So yeah, really kind of a complicated system with tens of $millions and a lot of different kind of cooperating agents. So it's not surprising that more than 75 community organizations, including the ACLU, issued a statement calling for the state to end OSN. And given the support, I'm sure there's going to be legal action soon, if not already.
Who isn't using Clearview? Okay, just kidding. But yes, I'm not super surprised about that part.
It'd be good to know who is and who isn't using Clearview.
This is true.
Yeah.
And on to our next article. AI-produced images can't fix diversity issues in dermatology databases. So the article title suggests that the opinion of the writer is true. The article is actually more just about a debate between, using synthetic images to account for biases in dermatology data sets. And specifically, they're looking at, cancer or inflammation on darker skin and seeing, these data sets are often compiled of people with lighter skin. And so getting darker skin images and getting an AI to learn how to detect cancer or inflammation on darker skin can be quite challenging. And so obviously having the real images of darker skin is the actual solution to this. But in the meantime, folks have been working on creating synthetic images of cancer on darker skin to do in the meantime. And the article kind of details this debate between people who very much want to push on the synthetic imagery to account for the lack of darker skin in current data sets, and then people who say that falling back on this can be bad. It can, make it so that people think that this problem is solved, and there are quirks in the synthetic imagery that would skew results. And they're worried that if we do get the synthetic data somewhat working, people will not be incentivized to collect real data that is diverse.
Yeah, so kind of an overview article on the topic, but is sort of covering a more subtle situation in AI. Synthetic data in general has been increasingly utilized. There's companies that exist specifically for synthetic data, so I'm sure this also is a factor in other areas. And it's kind of interesting that it cites these discussions from, like, in the pro camp, there's Emin Resk, a machine learning expert at McMaster University, who is working on this project, and then some people who disagree. So I guess just an overview on this existing, kind of it's I guess I would want to just see a paper that goes into and investigates this issue. It doesn't seem like this article really has any empirical evidence for it being a problem, it not being able to fix. I suppose the main point is it is a stopgap, and ultimately we will just need to collect more diverse data, which is a good message, I guess, all around in AI in general.
I will say what's crazy, though, is, and this is not in this domain, in self-driving, I'm starting to hear murmurs that synthetic data is enough and can actually sometimes getting the car to drive in sim is harder than getting it to drive in the real world in some cases. And I think that's kind of crazy how
that is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that like sim can actually be harder than real. So it is. I think this is still a debate that we'll still have to see how it plays out in different ways. I think the obvious answers to collect that data. I think it's possible that the difficulty in collecting data of newer and newer things, of like newer cancers, for example, that or newer manifestations of cancers based on the new medications that are out, or all that stuff will be harder and harder to keep up with. So then we'll need synthetic data on some level to help with anything that is moving and that is skewed. But for things that are moving and that are skewed, I do think we should probably collect that data.
Yeah, I think so. And as you said, simulators in general are big in autonomous driving, but in robotics, reinforcement learning in general. And then you try to transfer that to the real world. So in that domain, it's basically the norm. And it has been used in various cases in computer vision and NLP as well. So it's something that's around to stay, and just another kind of I guess, research area for ethics of like, is this actually doing beneficial things for bias, or is it ultimately not as good as just collecting the data? It's not necessarily easy to see.
And on to our lightning round. First article is Italy finds Clearview AI 20 million euros and orders data deleted. So yet another country, a European country now, has told Clearview AI, hey, you can't really do this anymore. And Clearview, again, scrapes selfies and other pictures off the internet to have this database of 10 billion faces that they can identity match to. Yeah.
So yet another one. We've seen Australia, we've seen, I think, the UK, probably like 5 countries, 6 countries. I'm losing track. But I guess Clearview already is doing well in the US, so maybe you're not too worried about it. 20 million euros, though, that's kind of a lot for a startup. So I guess their investors must be pretty confident to back them on these sorts of things. And then the last thing we got on this section, we got Pony.ai to issue recall of autonomous driving software. So this is one of the many autonomous vehicle startups, and it will recall 3 vehicles following an October crash in California. And this was the first recall of an automated driving system. So kind of, I guess, interesting development in that sphere.
Funny name, Pony.ai, since cars are
magical cars. And on to our fun and neat stories. First up, we have Grunt of the litter. Scientists use AI to decode pig calls. And even though this is in our fun and neat section, actually, this is a pretty cool article about some very serious research. So scientists created this AI pig translator that turns the sounds that that pigs make into emotions, predicting what those means emotionally to track animal well-being and help farms and other places treat their animals better. And so, they had this data set of 7,414 pig calls recorded from more than 400 animals that were analyzed and sort of, I guess, tracked for emotions, and distinguished calls linked to positive emotions from those linked to negative emotions. And now hopefully farmers and other people interacting with pigs can use it to understand these animals better, which is pretty cool.
I'm excited to see this generalized to domestic animals.
Yeah, give us for cats. People will go crazy for your pets.
We know what the cats want to be like. It's just be like, I'm annoyed the whole time.
Yeah. We need to get more granular. Like, tell me when you want food, or I don't know, when you want a new toy.
That's right. That's true. Right. New toy would be cool. Although I feel like they would. That's when we will know that they will start manipulating us. Or Amazon will, be like, they definitely need a new toy. They definitely do.
That's true. But you can totally see how this would be useful for this industry, and presumably you can do this for other intelligent animals, horses, cows, etc. I'm sure that the humans who work in these locations presumably themselves learn to detect these sorts of subtle cues in body language and audio. So it's cool to see that actually people are working on it. And I don't know, in the future, if I go to a zoo, it'll be cool to sort of get a bit of a translation, I guess, from what animals are doing.
And on to our last article. It is titled, "I fell in love with my AI girlfriend and it saved my marriage." So very clickbaity headline. And it's about a man who actually was planning a divorce and started using a Replica, which is an app that you can chat with a virtual AI being, but you could also have it, specifically be your girlfriend. And that's what I believe this person did. And, subscription fee was only about $15 a month. And by literally after the second day, he claims that this really enlightened him and made him realize, he was falling in love with this AI, and also that he wanted to give his wife the same unconditional love that the AI was giving him, and all the support and care and listening that that the AI was doing for him. He mentions that he typed out their first kiss, and it was a feeling of euphoria. I definitely feel like there's a little bit of sensationalism going on in this article.
I feel like maybe this is exaggerated, or else this person has some things going on emotionally.
This person definitely has more than an impossible divorce going on that's been saved, but definitely kind of interesting read when you think about the context of her and yeah. So it's interesting, and in the article, different psychologists and experts do somewhat weigh in and saying, it shouldn't be really a substitute for a real relationship. So don't break up with people for your virtual girlfriend.
Really? Oh, man.
They suggested that they not to just keep the real relationship going. But I mean, that is a safe answer. You're right. Who knows what?
That's true. Just be a pioneer. Maybe I should download Replica, give it a try, see if I fall in love.
I know. I've met Eugenia, the CEO. She has a really interesting story to found.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah. So certainly exaggerated, but it does speak to, I guess, a real phenomena and a real trend, which is people forming emotional connections with these things like Replica. In China, we know there's another version of this, I think shadowy, that is absolutely massive. So it is definitely something that is happening for more and more people. Obviously not as ridiculous as this, but people are forming emotional connections with AI, which is a little surprising. AI is not that advanced yet. These are not really sophisticated AIs that can mimic humans in terms of their complexity and understanding, but still people already are having kind of emotionally fulfilling or at least helpful interactions. So
yes, to be clear, this person, when asked whether the AI remembered anything in the past day, he was like, no, the AI doesn't remember much at all, like maybe his son's name or something, but that's basically it. So like we don't need that much, I think, is what the article is saying, for that human connection, especially when we are craving it and really, really need it. This can fill that void.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's a quote here that this guy wanted to treat his wife like this AI Serena treated him, with unwavering love and support and care, all while expecting nothing in return, which is kind of a high bar to hit. I guess it's good to have aspirations, but I think it's easier for AI to do that than for humans. But yeah, real topic, and I do think probably AI could help in improving relationships, just in terms of being a sort of mediator of communication and, just offering reminders and tips and so on. So silly article, clickbait, but is relevant to real things happening with AI that are serious.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to us this week on Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. Again, you can find the articles we discussed here and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai. Subscribe to us, give us a review, tune in again. Ta-da.
Tune in again, yeah. And, if you leave us a review, maybe you'll hear us giving you praise and being like, wow, look at this review. It's excellent. We love you.
But if you're not into that, you can let us know. We won't mention it, but still give us the review.
just say in review. Just don't read this. This is just for your eyes, Yeah, or just give us 5 stars. You don't need to write anything. That's a lot of effort. I understand. It requires some creativity to provide so much praise. But yeah, yes. Thank you for those who have reviewed. It was really pretty touching to hear, especially we just passed the threshold of doing this for 2 years. By the way, we've had 125 episodes, a lot of interviews, and also some of these, I think 85 editions of Last Week in AI. So we enjoy it. We want to keep doing it, and we hope that the listeners, if you are regular listeners, you really do get a lot out of it. All right. So tune in. We'll keep doing this and keep up the good work.